We are discussing chapter number 4, Forest Society and Colonialism. So there were so many things going on in the colonial rule. So there were Forest Act being imposed and things were regulated by the authorities. Then if something is done against the will of the people or against their livelihood, some rebellion will always be there. In many parts of India, and also across the globe, forest communities rebelled against the changes that were imposed on them. We know about Sidhu and Kanu in Santhal Paraganas, Birsa Munda of Chota Nagpur, and Alluri Sitaram Raju of Andhra Pradesh. They are still remembered. Why? Because they stood against all these things which were happening, especially for the forest where they belong. So we'll just talk about one rebellion which took place in the kingdom of Bastar in 1910. So this is the rounded area or the circled area, which is the actual area where the things happened. And if you see, the geography is like this. This was Madhya Pradesh area, and now this is coming in Bastar, and Kanker all are coming in the Chhattisgarh area. And this is the border area where a lot of forests were there. So Bastar is located in the southernmost part of Chhattisgarh, and it has borders with Andhra Pradesh, Odisha and Maharashtra. Now the central part of Bastar is on a plateau. North of this plateau is the Chhattisgarh plain, and the south is Godavari plain. The river Indravati winds across Bastar east to west. Various communities, they live in Bastar, like Maria Gonds, Durwas, these Bhatras and Halbas. And they often speak different languages, but they have almost similar custom and beliefs. So this is a picture of army camp in Bastar, and this was taken in 1910. And the army moved with tents, cooks and soldier. And here you see a sepoy which is guarding camp against the rebels, which we are just talking right now. So as we said, this Bastar in 2000, in 1947, there was a Bastar kingdom, and it was merged with the Kanker kingdom, and then it became Bastar district in Madhya Pradesh. In 1998, it was divided in 3 districts. 1947, they combined Kanker and Bastar. In 1998, they were divided into Kanker, Bastar and Dantewada. In 2001, this became a part of Chhattisgarh. So in 1910, as we are talking about, rebellion first started in the Kanker forest area. Why? Because the first thing happened here. We'll just talk about that. Now the basic thing is, you are still in news, you might be hearing about the Maowadi attack, etc. And this all started from here only. And that is why we hear so many news about this. So the people of Bastar, that they believe, and every the tribes, they consider that village was given its land by the earth, and in this way they look after the earth by making such certain offerings at each agriculture festival. And they respect the rivers, forest and mountain as spirits. And they all have boundaries, and they have certain natural resources within their boundary. If some other village or some other village wants to enter that boundary and want something, then they have to pay a small fee that was called as Devsari, Dand or Man. And most of them, they engage in watching, and you can say they're just paid through grain by different village people. And there is every year one big hunt where the headmen of the village in the Pargana, that is the cluster of certain villages, meet, and they discuss issues regarding their area, including the forest. Now what was the fear of the people? When the colonial government, they proposed to reserve 2/3 of the forest in 1905, they wanted to stop the cultivation, hunting and collection of forest produce. What will the people who belong to forest will do? Bastar people are the same. They got worried. And some villages were still allowed to stay in the reserve forest, but the condition was they need to work for free to the department in cutting and transporting trees and also protecting the forest from the fires. Then these villages were known as forest villages, and people were just displaced, no compensation, no notice. All these rents and frequent demands of free labor and all these things were happening, and this was adding to the suffering of the people. And then the final thing happened, terrible famine in 1899 to 1900 and again in 1907 and 1908. And this all created the background of the rebellion. So reservation, that started everything. Reservations of that is reserving the forest. This was the last thing which started everything. Now people began to gather, and they started to talk about this, and the initiative was taken by whom? The Dhurwas of Kanker forest. Why? But because the reservation law was first imposed there. This was the first place. They don't have any single leader, but village Nethanar, there was Gunda Dhur. He was considered as an important figure of this movement. So in 1910, mango, boughs, lump of earth, chilies and arrows, and they all began circulating within these villages. And messages also started flowing, and every village contributed. Bazaars were looted, the house of officials and traders, schools, police station, they were burned and robbed, and grain were redistributed. And those who were attacked, they either are from colonial state or they were connected to some oppressive laws. William Ward was the missionary here, and he saw the event and he wrote from all the directions came streaming into Jagdalpur, police, merchant, forest peons, the schoolmasters and the immigrants. So the British, they did what? Because the rebellion was, you can say uprising was there. So British sent troops, and the Adivasis leaders still wanted to negotiate or try to have a conversation with them. But British didn't do that. They just surrounded their camp and fired. And after that, they marched through the village and punishing those who were part of rebellion or they were connected to some rebellion. So most of the villagers, what they would do, they have to go to the jungles. They have to run to the jungles. So it took 3 months from February to May for the British to regain control of all these. But they didn't manage to capture Gunda Dhur. But it was a major victory for rebel. This was symbolic because the Reservation Act or law was temporarily suspended. Right? It was suspended. And the area also, which was 2/3 previously proposed, this was reduced to half. That was planned before. Now if you see the story of this forest and people of Basar, this doesn't end here. These things happened again and again. In 1970s, the World Bank proposed that 4,600 hectares of natural sal forest, this should be replaced by tropical pine to provide pulp for the paper industry. But this didn't go well. Means the project was to be stopped because people came against this. So we need to understand that this was not happening in India only, that is Asia. There are certain parts where colonies were there. So we'll just take an example of Indonesia. Why? Because the things are similar which were happening. So forest transformation in Java, first of all, let us know what Java is. And let me show you the picture so that we understand it better. Now this is the area of Java. This is Java. And these are the island country which is our Indonesia. So most of the Indonesia's forests were located in island like the Sumatra, the Kalimantan and West Irian. But Java is where the Dutch began their scientific forestry, as British did in India. Now this place actually now is very famous for its rice production, but at that time, once upon a time, it was richly covered with the teak and it was all being cut. So now you have a certain idea about what area we are talking about. So Java is now, as I said, rich producing land or island in Indonesia, but it was covered by a forest once upon a time. So the power of Indonesia, the colonies, were with Dutch, Holland or Netherlands people. And there were so many similarity in the laws of forest control in India and Indonesia. That is why we are discussing it. Java in Indonesia is the place where Dutch started the forest management. And they also wanted the timber to build ship. So in 1600, the population of Java was estimated to be 3.5 million. They have fertile land, but there were so many communities living in the mountains and practicing the shifting cultivation. So there were special people and very regarded people who were the woodcutters. So the Kalangs of Java, this was a community of skilled forest cutters and shifting cultivators. They were so valuable. I can give you an example that in 1755, when the Mataram kingdom of Java split into two parts, 6,000 Kalang, that is these woodcutters families, were equally divided between these two kingdoms. And without their expertise, the kings even can't build their palaces. So when the Dutch came into being, that is they started gaining control over the forest in 18th century, they wanted the same thing. They wanted these Kalangs to work for them. And in 1770, the Kalang resisted and they attacked Dutch fort at Juana. But this uprising was short-lived. It was being suppressed. So what was the Dutch scientific forestry? In 19th century, see, this is showing all the what we are discussing, this small picture. These are the trains transporting this teak out of the forest. This is late colonial period. So in 19th century, when it became very important to control the territory, not just the people, Dutch enacted forest law, as British did in India, in Java. They started in Java restricting villages access to forest. Now wood can only be cut for very specific purposes like making river boats or constructing houses, and under very close supervision. And if someone is found, that is villagers are found grazing cattle or transporting wood without permit or traveling on forest road with horse carts or cattle, they will be punished. As we saw in India, the need to manage forest for this shipbuilding and railway, this led to a lot of things like introduction of forest services. So in 1882, 280,000 sleepers were exported from Java alone, right? And all this required what? Labor in order to make logs and sleepers. So the Dutch first imposed rents on the land being cultivated in the forest, and then they also exempted certain villages. Why? On the one condition that they would provide free labor and buffaloes for transporting timber, and this was known as Blandongdiensten. Okay, this is a very difficult word, so still need to remember. So later, with the rent exception, they started giving some money also. So there was a person called Samin. So they have to face the Samin challenge. The Dutch has to face the Samin challenge. Around 1890, Sorontiko Samin, he was from Randublatung village, a teak forest village. He started questioning the ownership of the forest. He said that everything is created by the Almighty, the wind, water, earth, wood. So nobody could own it. Everyone is belong to everyone. So this movement spread, and it was supported by, and main key feature was Samin's son-in-law also. By 1907, 3,000 families were influenced by his idea. So some of the Saminists, they protested, they just laid down when Dutch came to survey. Others refused to pay taxes or fines, or they said, we will not perform the labor. So war and deforestation. This is the Indian munitions board, war timber sleepers piled at Sule Pagoda ready for the shipment. And this was happening because of the war. So war, how does war affected the forest, and why deforestation actually increased exponentially? The First and the Second World War had major impact on the forest. In India, the working plants were abandoned for that time, and the tree were cut to meet the British war needs. In Java, what happened? Because we are just trying to find the similarity also. Dutch were there, but the Japanese were occupying the region. They were about to occupy the region. So Dutch followed a very different policy, a scorched earth. That is, before leaving, they destroyed sawmills, burned huge piles of giant teak logs so that they don't come into the possession of Japanese. But Japanese, when they come, they also exploited recklessly for their war needs. They cut down forests, everything they did. And this is what happened at that time. So new developments in forest, since we see that we have a picture here again showing the long yard in Rembang under Dutch colonial rule. So since the 1980s, government across Asia and Africa, they begin to see the scientist based or scientific forestry and policy of just keeping the forest communities, those belong to the forest, away from the forest. These were the main key aspects or reason for conflicts. So conservation of forest rather than collecting just the timber has become the important goal. Now the government, most of the government, they have recognized that the people who live nearby, they need to be involved. So in many cases, if you see across India from Mizoram to Kerala, we have dense forest. These are protected just because certain you can say communities like Sarnas, Devara Kudu, Kanrai, they think them as a sacred place. Okay, villagers also started patrolling, and everyone like villages or villagers, they started guarding. And this is how local forest communities and environmentalists today, they are thinking of different forms of forest management, not what colonial rule people did. So this is all about the discussion of this topic. Thank you so much. Take care of yourself.